All right, this is talk number 27, and I'm going to have a very short prayer to get us started. Lord, open our hearts now to your word and help us with these texts that are a bit challenging. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Exodus chapter 21, and while you're turning there, I'll remind you that we're still in the law of Moses, and we're likely to be stuck in the law of Moses for a long time to come. We've had the Ten Commandments, and I suggested to you a couple weeks ago as we introduced the Book of the Covenant, Exodus 21 through 23 approximately, that the Book of the Covenant takes the Ten Commandments, not all of them, but some of them, and expands them and develops them and brings them from sort of the principle level down to the ground level. And the commandment we're going to look at today does precisely that for the fourth commandment, which mentions rest or release or restoration for the slaves, male and female, as well as aliens. And so what we're looking at today is really an exposition of the fourth commandment. Now, I want to step back a little bit and sort of brace you for what's coming, all right? What we're going to do today and for the next 9 weeks is make bricks. Have you ever made bricks? No, I didn't think so. You don't look like you've made bricks. I could tell by looking at your hands you didn't make bricks. But I lived in the Philippines. The man next door to me, I could see over the wall because I was 2 stories up, made cement bricks and pipes and other things. And it's quite a laborious and difficult task and very time-consuming. And he made them one at a time and stacked them up. And we're going to work through this question of what does the law say about these various topics, various bricks. And these bricks, eventually, we will assemble and we will build the foundation for justice. And then on top of that foundation goes the superstructure of more justice, the Constitution of Israel. And finally, we will have the just house of Israel, or the just society of Israel built. But some of this low-level work that's actually beneath ground and invisible, the building of bricks, is a bit dirty, a bit messy, a bit difficult, and a bit tedious. And so if you fall asleep this morning, make sure you don't bang your head because we're not insured. All right? So we're in the brick building business and will be in the brick building business for some time. While I'm working on this metaphor of building bricks, let me use it further and say this. We're going to look at some of the bricks that are built in Israel and then go over and look at some of the Mesopotamian bricks and maybe some of the Hittite bricks. Oddly enough, there aren't any real Egyptian bricks. In Egypt of our era, there weren't law codes. I don't know why. They had ma'at, a sense of justice, but they didn't have law codes. So it always comes back to looking at Hammurabi and the 6 or 7 other codes before Hammurabi and after Hammurabi. And what tends to happen is we look at this brick in our text, and then we go over here, and today I will look at brick 117. Actually has a number on it. And I will do a little comparison of brick to brick. But I want to tell you right up front that that's dangerous. Because what we really want to compare is not brick to brick, but we want to compare house to house. Does that make sense? And the bricks only make sense and only really have meaning when they're in the house. But it's going to take us a bit of time to construct that house. And what we want to do is to compare house to house. There are a few very recently published books that try to do that sort of stuff, and I've started reading them. None of them actually come to the point where they say, and precisely how did the house of Israel compare to the other houses? But they at least begin to lay out the data in a way that if you've got time and patience, and if you have $500 if you want to buy the books, only 2 books, they're $500 for the 2. I mean, 2 for $500, what do you want? And you can sit down and read them, or you can do like me, you can go to the library and read them. But there are things, we will get there. Now, at the top of page 3, if you have the notes for today, the definition of slavery in the ancient Eastern world, and I had quoted last time Bradley and Cartledge's brand new book, which I also cannot afford, The Cambridge World History of Slavery, Volume 1. There are 3 others. The Ancient Mediterranean World, published just last year in 2011. And they say that slavery has appeared in many different forms and is not always easy to separate from other forms of coerced labor. They define slavery as, and this is pretty standard, ownership of one human by another. That means chattel. The ability to buy and sell human chattel such as ownership creates. Also, the chattel status is heritable condition passed down through the mother. And today I will talk, and I hope I won't offend you, but it's the kind of talk when you get this, breeding. People used female slaves to breed. Now I know that we usually use that about dogs, but that gives you an idea of the feel for slavery. You bred new slaves, and that along with capturing slaves in war was the way that most people got slaves. You either bred them at home or you captured them in war. This characteristic, they note, is not found in coerced labor, that is, you can't buy them and sell them. This means that we ought to separate forced labor from slavery. Also, we shall need to distinguish between chattel slavery and debt bondage slavery, which is what we'll look at today. However, having said that, the more recent scholarship, and I don't pretend to be a scholar on slavery, and there's an enormous amount of literature on slave scholarship. More broadly speaking, slavery is the powerful humans oppressing less powerful humans to work for them so that they might increase their wealth, their power, and their prestige. Now you see that really sort of broadens it out, doesn't it? And so you might call things slavery that really quite, from the legal point of view, are not slavery. And we'll see how the Bible tends to handle that. Or from the point of view of the slave, it means lack of freedom to determine one's own direction in life, which strikes me as a rather modern way of looking at things. I don't know that very many traditional people ever thought about planning a life out. When considering slavery, we must consider not only the law and the legal definition of slavery, but also, I think, the social reality of slavery. Apparently, it is in this latter sense, the social reality, that Israelites in the Bible are called slaves. They apparently are not chattel slaves, but they certainly are forced labor. Now, Israel's slavery and broadening the textual base. We're going to look at Exodus 21 today, and you see I have some other texts there within Exodus 21. There are 2 or 3 other references within the Book of the Covenant to slavery, and we will pick up these bricks one by one as we go along. So I'm not working top down and giving you a systematic statement of how slavery worked, which is what you'd get in a good Bible dictionary, but I'm working bottom up, which is tedious and slow and messy, and assembling the bricks in the context as they come along. Next week, we will go to a parallel text in Deuteronomy 15, and I will tell you that again at the end of it. And if I can get my courage up the following week, we will go to Leviticus 25 and look at the passage that says, you may buy slaves from the foreigners. Oh dear, and if you know the answer to that, please send me an email and make it quick. I'm not quite sure what we will do with that, but we will look at it. We're going to look at all these texts. Importance of the topic of slavery from our perspective, taking for the sake of this lecture the R as North Americans, and I apologize to those who are watching on video and who are not North Americans. I'm certainly aware that some are not going to be North Americans. It could be British, it could be Kenyan, it could be Nigerian, it could be Filipino. There's lots of ways of framing this and thinking about the importance of it. But from our perspective, I think it's just interesting to pause, and here are probably the world's experts on slavery, Bradley and Cartledge, and they say, and I quote from page 2 of their introduction, Christianity did not make a difference to slavery in antiquity. Does that bother you? Christianity did not make a difference to slavery in antiquity. Now, I presume by antiquity they mean the first 2 or 3 centuries of the Christian era. They're not talking about Israel. They do admit later in their introduction that Christianity was directly involved in dealing with slavery, especially in the time of Calvin and later with Wilberforce. But they make the charge that Christianity did not make a difference to slavery in antiquity, and we will need to ask, not today and not even tomorrow, is that true? And if it's true, what do we make of it? But it brings home some very fundamental questions. Let me take it a step further, and again here I'm speaking as an American to us who are Americans. If I were elsewhere, I'd do it differently. But Mark Noll, who some of us know from Wheaton College, who's now moved to Notre Dame, and a very prolific and famous author, has published yet another book called Civil War as the Theology in Crisis. He published it in 2006. Now, I've not read the book. I've checked it out. I put my hand on it and breathed deeply, so I had the sense of it. But I can tell you, well, that's the way you have to do research these days, isn't there? There's too much literature. But what Mark has done for us is he's gone back and he's looked at the theological arguments that were made on both sides of the camp. And I read this literature years ago in a different way. Mark has updated, of course, and was shocked to find that my favorite assigned theologian in Bible college and seminary was on the wrong side. And if I mentioned his name, and since he's dead and gone to heaven, I guess it doesn't make much name difference, but it's Charles Hodge, the famous Prestonian evangelical, and he argued on the wrong side of this question. Now, I just want to step out of frame for a minute and say, you and I know that those dear people had a blind spot. Isn't that right? We think that when Charlie Hodge got to heaven, or maybe he stopped in purgatory for a week, and they purged things out of him, purgatory, all right, such as his wrong ideas about slavery, that when he got to heaven and he met St. Paul and he started talking about slavery, Paul said, we've had to revise your theology to use it in class up here. In fact, we've had to take several chapters completely out and rewrite them. There was a huge blind spot in evangelicalism in pre-Civil War theology. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, I just want to pause and ask what I think is an obvious question, and what Phil Johnston asked me about a year ago, and I'm still thinking about it, and that is, so what's our blind spot? Well, of course, the answer is we don't know. I mean, if we knew what our blind spot is, it wouldn't be blind, right? But what is our blind spot? What would our grandchildren 80 years from now say, Grandpa Wood, he believed, but we know that's not right. What is our blind spot? And generally speaking, the only people who know about these blind spots are the people on the edges who see things differently. They're called seers because they see things. The other word for seers is prophets, isn't it? But prophets are not mainstream people. Prophets are marginal people. You don't invite prophets home for lunch, because they'll say something rude and embarrass you and your guests and go on. So I just leave that with you. Close footnote. Let's move on. Were the Israelites slaves in Egypt? Well, the standard word for slave, ebed, is certainly used in the text, and I read from my notes here. It covers both chattel slavery. We mentioned this last time. It is used of forced labor, and then it's used today in our text of debt slavery. So the word that's translated slave or even servant, servant of Yahweh, so it's a very broad term, has a very broad, wide range. It's not a technical legal term that narrows the thing down. Now, more importantly, I want to ask about the social setting of our debt slaves. And let me just read you the first few words so that you see where we are. Exodus 21:2. Do you find the passage? Do you have your Bibles open? I hope you follow along. This is going to be a very, very textual reading, and if we have time at the end, I will reread it just to make sure that we did it right. If you buy a Hebrew, and our NIV says servant, you could say slave. And if you have other translations, and I invite you to bring along other translations because that always helps us to achieve our pedagogical goal, which is to be confused on a higher level, right? And there's nothing like reading multiple English translations to loosen you up a bit, isn't it? Because then you say, ha-ha, and you have to make some choices. So who is this slave that you, an Israelite, is going to buy? And I want to suggest that within Israelite society, there were a number of safety nets and mechanisms to help catch people as they had trouble. If your field flooded, or if you broke your leg, or something happened to you and you began to move down the socioeconomic scale, there were things to catch you. There were loans at no interest, all right? No interest loans. Then there was gleaning. You can go out and glean, and that was perfectly legal and perfectly okay. And then there was this thing that's called the kinsman redeemer, which we'll eventually get to, where the kinsman redeemer would intervene for you and rescue you. And once in a while, every 50 years, there was a restoration of all things at the Jubilee. But you might keep on sinking because these nets weren't adequate to catch you, and you might find yourself at the very bottom. Your crops had failed for the third year in a row. You had borrowed money 2 years in a row for seed corn, and the debtor now, the creditor now needs the money back, even though it's interest-free, and you don't have the money because your crops have failed, and he's saying, I need it to feed my family, and so the only thing left to do is to sell somebody. Now, the text doesn't say sell, it says if you buy. But if you're on the other end, you're being sold, aren't you? So someone's buying and someone's selling. Now, I know for us that almost seems unimaginable, doesn't it? And you would say, the father will sell himself into debt slavery. No, because if the father goes in, the whole family collapses. The whole household structure and its servants and whatever you might have would collapse. And so the father does not sell himself into debt until the very last. He sells his son. And apparently that's what we're dealing with here in verses 2 through 6. And then he can also sell his daughter. And there's several ways that you can sell your daughter, and verses 7 through 11 discuss one of the very difficult ways that you might sell your daughter. So we're talking about people who are at the very, very bottom. They're absolutely desperate. They're going to sell their daughters. Now, none of us have ever been there. I've tried marrying off daughters. But selling them? No. You know, in Africa, they pay you 20 cows for your daughters, but in America, it's thousands of dollars to go and marry off your daughter. And then they whisk them away, and they don't. It's a losing game to have daughters, unless you live in Africa where you can get something out of them. But this man had come to the bottom, and he's going to sell his daughter. And I said this last week, but I want to say it again. What is at the bottom, God puts at the top of the social justice laws. Can I say that again? What is at the bottom? A daughter being sold into slavery. God puts that first when it comes to explicating the social justice laws. I probably won't have time to say it today, but if you read the Code of Hammurabi, and I realize you probably didn't read it last night, but if you read all 282 laws of the Code of Hammurabi, the last law is a man says, I want to be free from you, and the master says, nothing doing, and he cuts off his ear. And so one of the laws about slavery comes last, and it means bondage. This is the first law in the book of the covenant, and it means freedom, as we will see today. All right, I'm on page 4 in the notes if you're following along, and I hope you are at least trying. Last week I read through the text, and I noted that the key term here that occurs 7 times is the word go free. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the text just now. I will read it as we go along. But you'll note that it occurs 7 times, and it clearly is what holds the text together. It's the catchword, it's the key word, and it really is the substance of what Moses is talking about here, and we will come back to that. So it's talking about going free. And last week I tried to say to you, and I brought my laptop and my overhead. I'm not very good at this, so I'm learning. But I brought my laptop, my overhead, and we'll try something. I've put the Exodus event, the Ten Commandments, the Book of the Covenant, and then next week we'll get to Deuteronomy in columns. And I handed you a chart last week. And I just want you to note that the Yatsad, the go free, therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, I will bring you out. It's the same verb, it's just translated differently. And so in the NIV, you wouldn't make the connection that the Hebrew reader would. But to go out, and if you keep on reading down, which my screen doesn't let me do right here, you come to the other word, slave. When you come to the Ten Commandments, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out, I sent you out, yatzah, out of slavery. Ebed, it's that word. Over here we just had this. If you buy a Hebrew servant, an Ebed, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year, he's to go free. Now you see the pattern. Go free, slaves. God brought slaves out of Egypt. Go free, slaves. 10 Commandments, I am the God who goes free, to use that word, slaves. When you get to the first commandment here, that, I wish I knew symphonic stuff, but that melody that was struck, right? Oh, last night Dolores and I heard the planets. Do you know the planets? Oh, wow, that was wonderful. And that melody that was struck is still very reverberating through the text. And when you get to the Book of the Covenant, it's still, go free slaves. And the law picks up what is already embedded in the narrative section. So it's not something new. And of course it picks up, and I said this last week, it picks up the very action and therefore the very character of God. Now I want to push it just one step further and talk about the justice motif. In this passage, and I am going to try to scroll down here so I hope we can see it, you not only have the go free, the text is moving, and the word for slave. Now the word for slave here is a bit different. It has an AH on the end of it, like Deborah, Sarah, Rebecca, Elizabeth, all these. Well, it doesn't have a bar on Elizabeth, but you know, just naming my kids. When you want to make the feminine in Hebrew, you add an AH, all right? So this is the feminine noun for slave. Now, it doesn't mean a feminine slave. That's a little different. We'll get to that. But there's a masculine noun for slave and a feminine, don't ask me why, but you've got that. And then as you keep on going down, but it's exactly the same word as slave that we have elsewhere. As you keep on going down, and I didn't put it in bold, but you can see it, judgment, which is the shapatim, which comes from that justice root, SPT, shapat, to judge. So in this column, you have the three words, go free slaves by an act of justice. When you get over to this column with the first of the commandments in the Book of the Covenant, it's go free slaves, and I didn't write this in, but if you run your eye back up to verse 1, these are the mishpatim, and it's the same SPT roots. And so you've got your three words. You've got go free, slaves, as a matter of SPT, matter of justice. Do you follow that? Okay. Blessed are those who read Hebrew, for they shall find all the secret meanings, right? That's not really quite true, but thank God we do dig up a few things once in a while. All right, so the justice motif. Now, who is the Hebrew servant? And I don't want to get lost today, and I don't want you to get lost, but I've been lost all week, and now I'm found. Although if I read another commentary, I'll be lost again. The word Hebrew sounds like, and is very close to, the word Abiru, which is either spelled with a B or a P. Which in many languages is blurred, certainly is in Tagalog. And you get spelled with a B sometimes, with a P sometimes. But this was a word that was used frequently in the ancient Near East and other languages, these radicals. And it meant people who were wandering, people who were migrants, people who had rebelled against the establishment. And because of that, they were people who were lowly and outcast and economically depressed. All right? These are the Abiru, the Hapiru, if you put the H into it. A lot of scholars in earlier years thought that the word for Hebrew here was a spin-off and related to that word. So they read the text as if it said, if you buy a migrant slave. Now, if that were true, then it wouldn't necessarily be an ethnic term, because Hebrew to us, and within other parts of the text, is an ethnic term, isn't it? They're Hebrews, they're not non-Hebrews. They're not Mesopotamians. But if you read it as a sociological term, then it could be a poor foreigner. Now, I am not an expert on these sort of things, but it seems like the consensus of scholarship, if one can ever talk about a consensus, it usually means I'm counting my friends. But, you know, if one can count it, well, it does, doesn't it? I mean, we have consensus in a lot of fields. You're all professionals. You know about that. You know, all doctors say, do they really? I just saw one on television told me I should drink the other thing. But, you know, what can we say about this? Apparently, it is the Hebrew, the word Hebrew underneath. It really is an ethnic term, but it still may retain the flavor of down at the bottom. And indeed, in this text, that fits, doesn't it? Because they're buying a Hebrew who's down at the bottom. If it were a non-Hebrew, then we've got some problems about reconciling other texts, and we'll come to that eventually. All right, if you buy a Hebrew slave, and so I've dealt with that word Hebrew. Now, if you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve you 6 years. So he's not a chattel slave. He's not your property. You're not going to have him for life. Right? And let me just say up front before we lose it. Among Israelites, there was no such thing as we know it as slavery. Now, let me say that again. Among Israelites, the intent was that there was no such institution as we tend to know it called slavery. You say, what is this? This is indentured service. This is indentured service. And many people came over to America on indenture because they couldn't pay for the boat ride, but they wanted to come to America. They got on the boat, they came over, and for 5 or 6 years they worked off their indenture, and then their name became Rockefeller or something. We don't know that that's the true story, but a lot of them went to the top, didn't they? You know that. So this is indenture, and you've got 6 years. There's a limit on it. You can only be working for this person for 6 years. So there was no such thing as slavery, at least among the Hebrews. There was only indentured service. Now, I want to quote a passage for you, LH 117, because one of the arguments that I would like to make, it's a hypothesis to be tested, and you're going to watch me try to test it. One of the arguments I want to make is that the law of Moses was fairly different in its social construction than the surrounding laws. Deuteronomy 4:1-8 says that the laws of Israel are, in effect, more just. Now, we'll have to see if that actually works. But here's one of the bricks. And so I'm going to look at this brick, Exodus 21, 1 and 2, and compare it with brick 117, which in the notes I've mislabeled 177 a couple times, so you'll straighten out my math. And I'm going to read it to you from Roth's translation of the Code of Hammurabi. If an obligation is outstanding against a man, and he sells or gives into debt service his wife, just make a footnote there, that never apparently happens in Israel. Sell your son, sell your daughter, you don't sell your wife. So that's a little bit different. He sells or gives into debt service his wife, his son, or his daughter. They shall perform service in the house of their buyer, or the one who holds them in debt service. And here comes the issue. You see it, I put it in italics. For 3 years, their release shall be secured in the 4th year. Well, if you're going to be indentured, you might as well move to Mesopotamia. It's half the load. Well, I've spent a good deal of time in the library this week trying to figure this out, and I'm not sure that I have, but let me read to you at least what I know at this point. The release after 3 years certainly sounds much more generous than a release after 6 years. I think we just need to say that. Right? I've read a couple books that are apologetic who look this way. But, you know, looking that way doesn't help when it's standing right in front of you. So let's look at it. It's there. Sprinkle, who's an evangelical and wrote his doctoral dissertation on the literary structure of the Book of the Covenant, a very helpful sort of piece, argues that the verb in Exodus 20, verse 2 is permissive. He may serve you, not he must serve you. So 6 years is the outer limit. Well, I don't know if that really helps or not. If it helps you, I'm glad. It doesn't help me as much as I would like to be helped. He also argues, based on documents from Newsy, that usually the indentured service lasted much longer than 6 years, often a lifetime. And I suspect that's probably correct. More helpful, Hallow, who taught for many years at Yale, argues that LH 117, not 177, was changed shortly after the death of Hammurabi. So when they had a new election in November and Hammurabi got voted out and the new guy got voted in, of course it didn't work that way, did it? These are not democracy. But they had a new king came in, and the first thing he did, says Hallow, in a very, very learned article that it took me forever and 2 cups of coffee to get through, he says at the end of it, just so, after 30 pages of discussion, it is here suggested that Samsu Iluna, and I do not know him personally, and later old Babylonian kings, now he was the king who came immediately after Hammurabi, Hallow says, circumvented Law 117 of the Law of Hammurabi by confining the release from debt slavery to the first year of the reign and to other such special occasions as were subsequently proclaimed by royal edict. Now, in Mesopotamia, it's well known, and we'll get to this eventually, that when the king ascended to the throne, he would proclaim an edict of release from debts, land, bondage, and this, of course, made him popular and tried to solidify. It was a strategic political move. It wasn't the 50th year, the 7th year. It was when he ascended to the reign, and then he might reign for 50 years and never do that again, all right? But he did that. So it's one of those edicts, and we'll come back to that and ask about it. But what Hallow is saying is that they took this law and they moved it within the realm of edict, so it only happened when the king ascended. Now, if that's true, and I have no reason to believe it's not true, then that certainly puts the law within its context, within the larger house. You follow what I'm trying to do? And so if you're comparing brick to brick, the Israelite brick doesn't come out too good. But if you're comparing structure to structure, this release happened, after every 6 years of working, you got off. But here, they manipulated it and they moved it around so that it didn't really happen. Skipping a line, one should also note that even in the law of Hammurabi, in the very next law, there is the possibility of extending the 3 years. So the law immediately after LH 117 reads, and I read law 118, if he should give a male or female slave into debt service, the merchant may extend the term beyond the 3 years. Now that's an editorial insertion by Roth, who translates these, but I presume that she knows what she's doing here. He may sell him. There are no grounds for claim. So it sounds like even Law 117 could be circumvented even within the Code of Hammurabi. Perhaps we should pause here again to admit just how very difficult it is to compare the laws of Moses with the laws of the ancient Near East. And we've already done that earlier today in my brick illustration. So my conclusion here is that the 7th year release of the male slave was possibly, and I think probably, a rather amazing law compared to the laws of the ancient Near East. There's nothing else like this. It's only Law 117 we need to think about. And so the whole idea that you get out of indentured service after 6 years just was quite novel within the Israeli setting. Now, what if the debt slave wishes to remain a permanent slave? Now let's read on. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year he shall, and here's our word, go free, be manumitted, be released, without paying anything. That is, he's worked off his debt, so he doesn't need to pay anything. And then we have some ifs under this. If he comes alone, verse 3, verse 4, if the master, verse 5, if the servant declares. Now, I'm going to try something. I've been itching to do this. And if it doesn't work, laugh with me, will you please? All right, this may turn out to be a total and absolute disaster. But I've been trying to figure out how to do this. And you'll notice this very clever machine, it flips over, and it becomes a drawing pad. And now I'm going to draw for you the literary structure of the Book of the Covenant, all right? I'll practice first with Book of the... Oh, I need to get a line, don't I? Let's see. Yeah. We're on. Can you see that? Oh, yes. Book of the Covenant, high-tech electronics. And here's what it looks like. You have a main statement. Come on, a main statement. Maybe we need to change the line size, huh? Thank you. A main statement. It does better in big. And then under that, you have minor statements. And then we'll see in verse 7, you have a main statement about a daughter being sold. And then under that, you have a number of minor ones. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't that improve the whole quality of the pedagogical experience? Hooray for Bill Gates and all those other people, huh? We're just glad they don't fly airplanes. So it becomes very technical, and I'm going to follow through this with you, all right? So here's where the brick building really gets to be messy. If he comes alone, he's not married. He is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, now the presumption of the text, and let me tell you how I think these texts work. I think these texts work in what's called high context. That is, the text presumes that you know what's going on in that world. Now the problem is we live in this world, right? A very modern world. That world is an entirely different world. It's a traditional world. And it has all kinds of assumptions which we don't share. And you know, when people come to our culture and they start learning our language, it's not just the language is the problem, but it's all the other things that these little words signal that they don't understand, right? And as teachers, you've got to fill them in. Well, the high context here is the presumption is that if he comes in alone, he's to go free. But if he has a wife when he comes, that is, the wife would come into slavery with him. So the presumption is that if the man is sold into slavery and he has a wife, the wife comes in with him, then she too is to go free with him. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? So, subcase 1, man without a wife, man with a wife, and we know what happens. Now, if his master gives him a wife, he comes in alone and the master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master because the master gave him the wife, right? And what we don't know in our culture, but they know in that culture, you don't just go out and propose to a girl and she says yes. You've got to pay bride price. You've got to pay bride price. And if you're living in China, it's jade, or at least it used to be when we lived among Chinese in the Philippines. If you live in Kenya, there's no question what it is. It's cows and goats and maybe a television or two on the side because they're modernizing. But cows are still, it's always counted in cows. All right? And so this slave he doesn't have any money. So how did he get a wife? The master bought him a wife, paid the bride price. You follow that? The master has an economic investment in that woman, and he gave it to the slave. Now I'm going to say something that's a bit rude, but it's the way people talk about this. He gave the slave a woman so that they could breed. Because the children of the woman will be the masters. And he's multiplying his slaves. Now, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, aren't there? And these children, do they become chattel slaves? Or just where do they fall into this whole scheme of things? And the text doesn't say, and so we probably don't know. So if his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, and you'd like to say, if she didn't, then what would happen? But the law doesn't tell us. So it could have gone down 4 or 5 more pages. And when you read the Code of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi covers things that we ask here that the text doesn't say. And there are things in the Code of Hammurabi that it doesn't ask that the law of Moses said. So comparing them is really tricky business, all right? It's not, it's apples and oranges, often it's not. But if he gives him a wife that he bought and has an economic investment in, and she bears sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, only the man goes free. You say, oh, well, now I'm not arguing for slavery, I'm simply describing it. But if you can put yourself into that world, which I realize is very difficult, and if you're the master, And if the wife goes free, hey, this is a losing proposition. You're not going to be buying any more wives for your slaves. Now, verse 5, something that never occurs in the ancient Near East apart from here. If the servant declares, I love my master. Now, how in the world could that happen? Well, it must be that the arrangements here are not too bad. You can see that this absolutely does not work, at least would hardly ever work, in the kind of slavery that we as America have in our past, do we? I mean, you might find the odd case here and there, but by and large, this is not going to work. And in many other cases, is slavery as well. So it says, if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and maybe that's why the master gave the wife to the slave, hoping that when he married her and had children, he would not want to leave and become a permanent slave. That might be. Then his master, if he says, no, I love my master and my wife and my children, and I want to stay, which is just unheard of, then the master must take him before, and here's one of the black holes in the text, the judges. The Hebrew here is, and you know the Hebrew, Elohim. It's gods, isn't it? Or it can be God. God can be referred to in the plural. Elohim. So, but Elohim sometimes is used as judges. Sometimes it's referred as gods with a small g, plural. Sometimes it's referred as God. And other times it has other references. Sprinkle argues that it's before the ancestral images, and it connects him to the family as part of the extended family. I really like that interpretation, and it resonates with my missionary background. I can't find any other scholar who's followed him, though it's a little tricky. But just exactly what this word means is not clear. But you bring him before these Elohim. The NIV says judges, but if you read others, you'll get very different translations. And I would like to think that that brings him into the extended family. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost. And there's a lot of discussion about what door this is. The door of the house, the door of the tabernacle, no temple for 400 years, please. Or some other door. And pierce his ear, which is usually a symbol of obedience. So you pierce his ear, probably put some sort of something in there. Then he will be his servant for life. Now, how are we to read that? Is this moving down into abject poverty? Or is this moving up into the extended family? You see the difference? It's too bad Moses didn't know about footnotes. He really could have helped us a bit on this one. My guess, and it really is a guess, is that within the larger context, it means moving up into the extended family. You know about Abraham, who had 318 home-born servants. Do you see where they come from? He had slaves, and they were home-born. He had 318 of them, and Genesis tells us very carefully in chapter 17 that he circumcised them, and they became members of the covenant. All right? Well, now, if you're in the household with Abraham and you're circumcised and you're part of the covenant, which way are you moving? My guess is you're moving all up, right? Rather than moving down. Now, I may be letting my predilections guide my exegesis. And there are other commentators, and I have them sitting on my desk, staring me in the eye, who say, oh no, this is misery, this is bad news, things are coming apart. And I don't know that there's any evidence to go and put one's hand on other than what we're looking at. All right, I leave the male slave with you. But now you've sold your son, and here's what happens to him. Suppose you sell your daughter. Suppose you sell your daughter. Now watch. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as men servants go free. Well, that doesn't seem very nice, does it? The man, after 6 years, goes free. But the daughter, you always knew the Bible was against women, didn't you? And here it is in black and white. The daughter, she goes in, never to come out. Now what happens? Well, we've got a couple contextual questions to ask here is, when she goes in, what happens to her? Let's read a little bit and see if we can uncork this. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free, and it's our word, as men servants do. If she does not please the master, oh, very ambiguous, isn't it? Does not please the master. What? Burnt his toast? Yeah, I mean, these are the sorts of things that rabbis can go on for months talking about, right? Does not please the master. If she does not please the master, who selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selected her for his son, so he bought the girl, could be for himself, could be for his son. If he selected her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he, now I presume the he here is still the master, if he, and the English translation here misleads us, if he marries another woman, the literal translation is, if he takes another. Takes another what? That really is the question. Takes another what? Well, takes another woman. Yeah, okay. But as what? If he takes another, he must not deprive the first one of her food, her clothing, and then we get into one of these black holes, marital rights. The word is only used one time in the whole of the Bible. And many scholars argue that it means oil. You say oil. Yeah, oil, because oil was used to keep your skin nice, and it was considered to be one of the very best things. And many people line up on the side of oil. So he must not deprive her of food, clothing, and something. Huh? Oh, ona is the Hebrew, and maybe we'll just leave it at ona. If he does not provide for her these three things, and then we get to the punchline, and we'll come back to it, but let's go ahead and get it now. She goes free. Now, you follow the structure? The man comes in, and he goes free, but he might stay as a slave. The woman comes in as a slave, but if things don't turn out quite right, she goes free. Do you see the movement? Free, slave, slave, free. It's very nicely structured. So, she goes free, which in the ancient Near Eastern context is absolutely staggering. Now, let's ask, who's the she? I think most people reading this, including myself and the translators of most English translations, would say, he marries her and she becomes his wife. Yeah, but it doesn't work that way in the Bible. And I've lived long enough in the Philippines and Africa, and one of my opening questions with the students is, and your father, how many wives does he have? Half of the students at any GST come from polygamous families. Huh? All right? So, one of the opening questions, besides finding out what language they speak, or languages, most of them speak 5 or 6, besides finding out what language they speak, and that tells you something about their ethnicity, you say, and your mother, which wife is she? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Or is she something else? You follow the question? You don't ask these questions. When you meet someone, you don't say which wife is Dolores? Well, she's my favorite wife. Yeah, that's a safe answer, isn't it? Yeah. But when we play games of who are you and who is me, we don't ask that question. But in Africa, you may not ask it directly, and I didn't, but you listen and you find out pretty soon who's which wife. And so this guy may already have a wife or 2 or 3. If he's got enough money to buy slaves, he probably has enough money to have more than one wife. So, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as men servants. Who is she? All right, now I want to follow the notes here because I've struggled with this, And I've been helped a great deal in reading this by a lady, and I do think it's important that she's a lady, named Pressler. If I can just step out of context for a minute and say, a lot of us white upper middle class males, we know what the nickname is for them. You're looking at one, all right, on camera. We have a very hard time interpreting the Bible because the Bible doesn't quite fit that mold. And one of the most helpful things hermeneutically in the world that one can do is to be filled with the Holy Spirit, who does not tell us the meaning, right? But he helps us hold hands with people who are different from us. And if you're an upper middle class white male like me with a PhD, all right, it's very hard to hold hands with people who are female and who are from a different culture and maybe don't have a PhD. You with me? You know the arrogance of us interpreters. I mean, the New International Commentary, the New International Bible Translation, there's nothing international about it at all. It's all white male upper class people. Come on, give me a break. You know. But if we hold hands, as I've had the privilege of doing, with black, bright, female scholars at Next, you get a different flavor. And I picked up Pressler. She's not an evangelical. I don't think she's an evangelical. But she's a woman, and she's got a sharp eye for women's issues. Hallelujah, right? And so I make a point of always trying to read all the women I can. And if they are black, brown, yellow, or green, and not white, all the much better. You're likely to get something out of the text. And I don't think the richness of the Word of God and our experience of kingdom living will ever become rich until we reach out by the Holy Spirit and humbly hold hands in humility with people who are very different from us. Close hermeneutical footnote, all right? No extra charge for that. You get that free. Or you're getting the whole thing free, after all, aren't you? But now, I want to read Pressler to you. I'm in the middle of page 6, all right? And I've come down to about this point. Pressler, 1998, page 162, outlines the following contextual evidence for thinking that the another is not another wife, but another concubine. I remember Elizabeth reading the Bible many years ago when she was little, and she said Solomon had 700 wives and 300 porcupines. Well, I can identify with that a little bit. Porcupines, all right. Yeah, concubines. We know about as much about concubines as we do about porcupines. In fact, it's much more likely that you've seen a porcupine than you've seen a concubine. Hands up all the... No, I won't ask you. You don't look like the sort of people who've seen concubines. And if you saw one, you wouldn't know it anyhow, would you? Yeah, I have seen a concubine. And it's not an entirely pleasant experience. Rather, another concubine. She is called an ama. The lady here is called an ama, which is the female slave. Now, it's not just the female ending, but it really means a female slave. And not a wife, an isha. All right? She is sold and not given in marriage. So what we have going on here really isn't a marriage. The purchaser is referred to as her master or owner and not her husband. Now, you might be able to push those around, but the next piece of evidence I think is absolutely conclusive. And I hope you picked it up when I read it. She can be redeemed if disliked by the master. And if the master does not provide for her in the three basics of life, she is to be set free. Pressler observes, quote, redemption, you with me? Redemption and letting go free are ways of speaking about manumission of slaves and not the divorce of a wife. I think it's those pieces. So when you read this text, let me just focus on it again so you can see it for yourself. Verse 8, if she does not please the master who selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. The brother, the father, the somebody can come and redeem her. And that's hard for us to understand also, and maybe we'll come to that eventually. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because she has broken faith with her. And then down at the end, she goes free. She's manumitted. So I think it's fairly conclusive here that what we're talking about is a man selling his daughter to be a concubine. And that's why she doesn't go free at the end of 6 years. But now I wonder if you realize where we are socially. We've been pretty near the bottom. With this, we hit the bottom. You can hear the thud. How would you like to sell your daughter to be a concubine? A third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh sex partner for this man. And your contractual obligation is to breed with him and to have babies. I mean, is that your ideal for your daughters? Boy, that's pretty near the bottom, isn't it? You've got to be awful desperate to get down there. Does Yahweh know about this? Yes. Is Yahweh happy about this? I shouldn't think so. Does Yahweh have laws to protect the people who reach the very bottom? Oh, absolutely. And this is the law. Now, we may not understand it, but it is the law. All right? And let me read it again and see if we can see Yahweh's passion to protect the people who hit the very rock bottom. If a man sells his daughter, he's absolutely desperate. I presume he sells his son first, because he can get him back in 6 years. But if he sells his daughter, this is goodbye forever. As a servant, she is not to go free. It's the end. If she does not please the master, and the Hebrew is as obscure as the English, so don't ask me what the Hebrew says. I presume it has something to do with sexuality. But maybe she burns the toast. I don't know. But she doesn't please him. If she does not please the master who selected for him for herself, he must let her be redeemed. Apparently he's not going to fulfill his obligation with her and have sex with her and have children. He has no right to sell her to foreigners. Now, if he sold her to a foreigner, she probably becomes a chattel slave, which means she falls right off the shelf and disappears. The foreign caravan, like Joseph, taken away. I mean, she's really gone. She's really gone. Can't sell her to foreigners. Can you sell her to Israelites? Text doesn't say. So we don't know. You say, well, she's been used sexually. You can't do that. Well, I don't know. The text doesn't know, so just leave it that. He has no right to sell her to foreigners. You see that he's trying to keep her from hitting the very bottom? He's trying to hold on to this girl. She can be redeemed. That would get her out of the mess. He can't sell her to a foreigner. That would make the mess worse because she'd become chattel. If he selected her for his son, he, the father, must grant her the mishpat. You've heard that word before, haven't you? Mishpatim, which means laws. This is the first one. This is the first mishpat, translated rights, which is probably a good translation. He must grant her the mishpat, the justice, the rights. She's being protected by law. That's the function of law. It's to protect those at the very bottom. He's to give her the rights of a daughter. That is, he, the master, who picked her for his son, must treat her as a daughter. Which I suppose, among other things, means he mustn't have sex with her. And anyhow, that would be incest. And even the Code of Hammurabi rules that out. So that should go without saying. He must not deprive the first one, verse 10. If he, the master now, so we've done with the son, if he, the master, marries another, so this is reverting back to the sense where the master married the concubine, or not married, but took, and I want to qualify that word again, if he not marries, because marriage means you think of wife, doesn't it? But the word is actually in Hebrew take. If he takes another concubine, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and then we have this onah, which nobody really knows what it means. It probably does mean oil. It might mean marital rights. If it means marital rights, then it means conjugal rights, or to put it in plain English, sex. And you say, why in the world would a concubine want to have sex with her master? I'm going to ask you to leave your modern world and come and visit the traditional world. She wants to have sex with her master because, first of all, he's 20 years older than she. You say, he is? Oh, yes, he is. He's 20, maybe he's 30 years older than her. Oh, that's pretty standard stuff in Africa. And he's going to die. And she, she's going to be beached. She's going to be in trouble, isn't she? So if the master stops having sex with her, she's not going to have kids. Now, this is before Franklin Delano Roosevelt invented Social Security for us. She doesn't have a Social Security number. Can you imagine that? What is her Social Security? As it is in the whole world, it's children. Right? Some of my Social Security is sitting over here. Just hasn't kicked in yet. But in the traditional world, your children are going to take care of you. Now, we moderns, that's just unthinkable, isn't it? That just doesn't happen. But not to have sex with the master meant she wasn't going to have babies, and not to have babies meant that when the master was dead and gone, she would be in real trouble. Her dad's dead by then, and her brothers don't need her, and they may be in trouble. So what's going to happen to this concubine? She's not even a widow in the sense of being a wife. She's simply a concubine, a former concubine, of a man who's dead. That's not a very... So maybe marital rights is correct, and if it is, that's the way it works. Now the last line, verse 11. If he does not provide her with these three things, the food, the clothing, and the ona, whatever that may mean, she is, and here comes the punchline, I've already said it once, she's to go free. This is unthinkable. This is absolutely unthinkable. She goes free. She's out of this mess. Now you say, well, yeah, all right, she's out of this mess, but then where does she go? Well, it doesn't say. It doesn't say.